And on the top of your sheet there, you'll notice some fill-ins. And if you have your booklets there, life can cause anxiety. Life can cause anxiety. All anxiety is not bad. And it can be opportunity by another name. So just being alive, it can cause anxiety, but not all anxiety is bad. It can be opportunity by another name. Anxiety comes when we have made a difficult decision. Anxiety comes when we have made a difficult decision that includes a step of faith. And I'm looking now at the models we talked last night about Hebrews chapter 11. Those in Hebrews chapter 11, they all had to take steps of faith. And I'll guarantee you there was anxiety in taking the steps of faith. And so anxiety comes when we have made a difficult decision that involves a step of faith. We cast that on the Lord. And in the parenthesis there, 1 Peter 5:7. Casting all your care upon him. Why? Because he cares for us. What a thought. I mean, the God of the universe cares for us. Amen. I mean, that is mind-boggling to me. But yet it's true. Now, depression comes when we don't make a right decision because we were afraid or faithless. Depression comes when we don't make a right decision because we were afraid or faithless. For example, I believe that some people early in life may have gone to Christian camp, may have been in a church revival. They committed themselves to serve the Lord. And at that point felt like God would have them be serving him on a full-time basis, some way, somehow. And yet, the fear of that and the faithlessness came in. But usually, as they get older, there is a depression. And I have found the most critical people in the membership of a church were those who were called and didn't do it. And they become very critical of those who did. For example, if the pastor stands in the pulpit, they'll think, yeah, right, I know what his motive is. But this person, but normally if they do write a check, they'll put missions in big print so the pastor will know that not a dime of their money is going to pay him. But usually there'll be that kind of they're in that objective case and kickative mood. They will stay with that. And the faithlessness, because there is a resentment of those who did make the step of faith, who did live with less. But all who were used of God had the courage to make the step of faith. All who were used of God had the courage to make the step of faith in spite of fears and anxious cares. And just put after that Hebrews 11, and you'll have a whole list of people who made those steps, and everyone there made steps of faith in spite of the fears or the anxious care that came as a result of it. And so when we look at life, we look at Elisha. Now, Elisha was a servant to Elijah for a long time. And when God told Elijah when he was in that deep depression, and he met with him at Horeb, and he said, Elijah, relax. I've taken care of international affairs. Jehu is doing national affairs, and I have your replacement already picked. Elisha is going to take your place. Relax. I've got this all under control. And so we see Elisha now has the mantle placed on him. He has the responsibility placed on him. And now we begin to see him function the way Elijah did. Now we find Elisha meeting in verse 8 of 2 Kings 4. And it fell on the day that Elisha passed the Shunem, where there was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And it was so that as oft as he passed by, he turned in thither to eat bread. So here was Elisha passing through, and he was itinerant, going from place to place, preaching. And she said unto her husband, behold now, note this phrase, I perceive that this is a holy man of God that passes by us continually. Interesting, is it not? People will remember us. Will they remember us as a holy woman of God or a holy man of God who touched a life? I tell Christian school teachers, you will be remembered. And you will be remembered how? As a holy woman of God or a holy man of God. And this woman tells her husband, I perceive that this Elisha is a holy man of God. Verse 10, let us make a little chamber. And this is where the prophet chamber idea came from. A lot of churches have prophet chambers, or people whose families have grown, they have extra rooms. They make a prophet chamber for guest speakers who come through. And we find them all over the country. Let us make a little chamber, I pray thee, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed, a table, a stool, a candlestick. And it shall be when he comes to us that he shall turn in thither. So when he's coming through, he'll have a place to stay. Like I'm staying in the pastor's prophet chamber. Because now that they have that extra space, I'm able to stay down there in their prophet chamber. It fell on the day that he came thither and turned into the chamber and lay there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, call the Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said unto him, say unto her, behold, thou hast been careful with us for all this care. What is to be done for thee? Wouldst thou be spoken for to the king or to captain of hosts? And she answered, I dwell among mine own people. And he said, what then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, verily she had no child, and her husband is old. So here's what her desire. Her desire was to have a child, but she was getting older, and her husband was old. And he called her, and when he called her, she stood by the door, and he said, about this season, according to the time of life, thou shalt embrace a son. And she said, nay, my soul, thou man of God, do not lie unto thine handmaid. And the woman conceived and bare a son at that season that Elisha had said unto her, that according to the time of life. Now, we have a drama here. There's 4 elements to this drama. We have a desperate parent. We have a dead child. We have a defective servant, and we have a dedicated servant. These are the 4 elements of this drama, of this Old Testament story. Things that were written aforetime were for our learning and admonition. Paul told the Corinthians, the things that were recorded before Old Testament times, they're all for our learning and admonition. And here is one of the cases where that's true. Now, the child was born, and obviously getting a little older. In verse 18, when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the reapers. And he said unto his father, my head, my head. And he said to a lad, carry him to his mother. So the boy now grows. He goes out to work with dad in the field as the reapers were bringing in the harvest. And he said, Dad, my head, my head. Whether he's having a sunstroke or what happened. And the dad said, carry him to his mother. Verse 20, and when he had taken him, brought her to his mother, he sat on her knees till noon and died. So here this young man had been in the field working with Dad. Whatever happened, the servant carried this boy to his mother, and he died in her arms. So we have a dead child. First element of the drama. Now we see the desperate parent. Verse 21, she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God. What did she do? She brought him and laid him on Elisha's bed. She was convinced that if there was ever going to be any help, it was going to be through the man Elisha. Amen. And shut the door upon him and went out. Put him on the bed, and she called unto her husband and said, send me, I pray thee, one of the young men and one of the donkeys, and she, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, wherefore wilt thou go today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. She didn't tell her husband the child died. In fact, I don't think he ever knew that the child had died until later. And she saddled a donkey and said to her servant, drive and go forward, slack not your riding for me, except I bid thee. So she went and came unto the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her afar off, that he said to Gehazi, his servant, behold, yonder is that Shunammite. So here's Elisha and Gehazi standing and sees what Elisha believes is that Shunammite woman. And said, Gehazi, go and see what is wrong. Run now, I pray thee, to meet her, and say unto her, is it well with thee? Is it well with thy husband? Is it well with the child? It's a good 3-point outline. How is it with you personally? How is it with you in your marriage? How is it with you with your child? What a great 3-point outline. Is it well with thee? And she answered, it is well. She lied to Gehazi. She said, everything's fine. And when she came, I don't think she trusted Gehazi any further than she could drop kick a ham and organ. And I'll point out later why I believe that is. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, let her alone, for her soul is vexed within her. And the Lord hath hid it from me and hath not told me. And I've told many, many churches, don't take for granted the person sitting on your same aisle is in total rejoicing and it is total joy and total faith. I said, we would be surprised at how many people come with vexed souls and sit in a morning service. They're vexed in their soul. They're totally disturbed within their heart. And Elisha said, let her alone. Well, when she got away from Gehazi and she came to Elisha, she grabbed him by the feet. I mean, can you imagine this woman getting down and grabbing him by the ankles? Now, you would not have to be an expertly trained counselor to know that this woman has a need. You don't have to go to Indiana for that training. You would have an instant. This woman has a problem. She just tackled me. Then he said, did I not desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, don't deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, gird up thy loin, take my staff in thine hand, go thy way. If thou meet any man, salute him not. And if a man salute thee, answer him not again, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. So he said, Gehazi, take my staff and go. Remember that staff, they've seen a lot of activity with that staff, the splitting of waters and so on. Take my staff and lay it on the face of the child. And Gehazi does it. And the mother of the child said, as the Lord liveth, and as my soul liveth, I will not leave thee. And he arose and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff on the face of the child. But there was neither voice nor hearing. Wherefore he went again to meet him and told him, the child is not awake. Now the key here, the power was not in that staff. Where was the power? In the life of the carrier of that staff. The power was in the life of Elijah. The power was now in the life of Elisha. It was not in that staff. And here you have Gehazi, a servant, laying that staff, and nothing happened. And, excuse me. Now verse 32, and when Elisha was come, now we get to the dedicated servant. We saw the dead child, we saw the desperate parent, we saw the defective servant. Now we see the dedicated servant, that is Elisha. And there are 5 principles here that you will have, that you have in your sheet. And first of all, we see the principle of proximity. What did Elisha do? And boy, all of these are principles in mentoring and principles in discipleship, principles in the touching the needs of hurting people. He went in. In other words, principle of proximity. Go to where the problem is. Husband, wife having difficulties. He said, I'm going to sleep on the couch downstairs. And you don't solve a problem. Go to where that problem is. Not one in the bedroom, one on the couch. You go to where that problem is. A teenager in rebellion goes in the bedroom and slams the door after telling off his parents and locks the door. The dad has to go knock the door, said, son, open that door because I need to go where the problem is. I think when we ignore problems and we ignore situations that we need to deal with right away, you go to where that problem is. How did Jesus solve our problem? What did he do? He became man. He practiced proximity. He came to where the problem is. I came to not call the I called those who are sick. That's who I came to help. And Jesus comes and practices proximity. And when he says he came to the cross, he came to this world, took on flesh, became man. Why? Because we had a major problem called sin. And that major problem called sin could not be solved unless he became man. And when we know someone is in a difficulty, we go to that person. Sometimes it's all you need to do is stand there. Somebody just had some deep grief. You don't need to go with all kinds of outlines of help and counsel. You know what? Just standing there sometime. Being present. Going to a hospital. You don't need to talk. Your presence talks. Your presence communicates, I care. And they know when it's time for me to talk, I know to whom I can turn when I need to talk. So here we see the proximity, going where the problem is. I mean, we could go into many, many, many illustrations, as I know you could go into. Secondly, he shut the door. Principle of privacy. He shut the door. Some things can be dealt with in a group. You can be speaking to a congregation. Other needs have to be met one-on-one. And it's just that person has a need. I will pour myself into that person who has that need. And we are living in such a time when there are so many people who have a burden. They don't know how to express what that burden is. They know there is a need, and you go one-on-one. Some lady you know is really under a burden. Go one-on-one with that person. Show by your presence, first of all, and then secondly, show by your fact that you're willing to spend time alone with that person. Or you know some guy We've done this with many, many new converts, just one-on-one. Get into a Bible study, challenge their one-on-one. Dr. Ross Campbell wrote a book. You might remember this, you older folks, How to Really Love Your Child. Dr. Ross Campbell wrote this book, How to Really Love Your Child. It was a very popular book years and years ago for parents, but also I've used a lot of applications speaking to Christian educators at conferences. And how do we really love a student? How do you really love a student? First of all, Dr. Campbell said eye contact. You know, when you're talking to someone, eye contact is so crucial. You know, when you're correcting a young child and dad is saying, son, look at me. And their chin is locked right into their chest. Son, look at me. Lift the head up. Look at me. Because what does eye contact communicate? It communicates I care. Why would a child who had been disobedient not want to look into the eyes of the dad? Guilt. And so, have you ever seen the parents are sitting up front getting ready to go up into the choir loft? Teens are sitting in the back and there's a ruckus back there. Mother turns. Her son is, like arrows. Eye contact. I remember when students would be getting serious and the guy meets a gal and says, I think I'm going to invite her to meet my parents over Christmas. And they're sitting in the rec hall and and I'd always go, zzz, 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 zzz. It's there. It's there. Something's going to happen. Because there's zaps going back and forth that are not visible. When you put your hand like that, you can see that. What are they doing? They're communicating. Because legally they can't do anything else. and so when you see the idea, eye contact. You remember what Jesus did with Peter? Jesus looked at him. And instantly Peter was convicted and realized what he was. Secondly, Campbell said, focused attention. In other words, it takes focused attention. If you're going to really love your child, there are some that they just need the one-on-one. That's what I like to do. My daughter and her husband, now that their kids are grown, but when their kids were home, they would have mom-daughter date once or twice, maybe once every 2 weeks or something, and then a father-son date. It's just dad and son going out, going to get a bite to eat, going to a restaurant or a fast food, and just sit and be together, because there's that focused attention. Sometimes it just takes time to be focused that way. And it's precious time, because those times can never be recalled. And they have, I remember I was driving with my son, Stephen, one time, and I think he was maybe about 14, and we were driving, and I said, Stephen, I'm going to ask you a question, and please be honest with me. What don't you like about me? He said, Dad, there's nothing I don't like about you. I said, Stephen, be honest. I will not be offended. He said, Dad, there's nothing I don't like. And Stephen and I were buddies. I taught him climb when he was 13 years old. He was climbing, doing things that the guys we are training on climbing that say, I'm not going to do this. They would quit after the third day. So we did a lot of fun things. And then finally he said, Dad, you're gone a lot. I said, Stephen, I'll change that. Because you're president of a college, and you're out representing and you're speaking. And I said, Stephen, I'll cancel as much as I can ethically, and if I can't, I'll leave what I'm doing. Well, I canceled as much as I could ethically, and then realized I couldn't do any more unless I did leave where I was. And so what I did is I took him out of school for a year, and he traveled with me. We were in Jerusalem by the Wailing Wall. He liked that one way better than the one we had in our house. And and so, I mean, we traveled parts of the world and crisscrossing the United States. But focused attention. Physical contact, number 3. Now, this is a parent and a child. This is not a teacher and a student, unless it's just a pat on the back or glad you're in class. Sometimes teacher waits at the door, and students are coming in and know that one of the girls' mothers is in a real critical health situation, and just say, honey, I'm praying for your mom. Glad you're in my class. Just a little tap on the shoulder. But for a parent, a family, you can have physical contact. You can do the hug-a-bugs. You know, Dr. Fremont used to talk about having a love sandwich, mom on one side, dad on the other, and the bologna in between. And they would make love sandwiches, the hug-a-bugs that they would do. Now, I was raised in a Finnish family. Finns don't show emotion unless they can't find a wrench they're looking for. So we were not a hug-a-bugs. I'd be gone 6 months and come home, Dad would say, hello. That was intimate. To a Finn, that was intimate. No, what about the Italians? Mario goes off to camp. He's gone 5 days. And Mom on Friday has banners across the street. Welcome home, Mario. Everybody in the 3-block area is getting kissed. What's going on? Mario's coming home from camp tomorrow. Finns were not that way. All the hugging was very stiff. But physical contact is crucial. And then the fourth thing Campbell said is discipline. There has to be control. Discipline. And there's security in a wall. When a teen hits the wall and it doesn't fall over, that's security for him. Whether he admits it or not, he is very glad that that security is there. And so we see he shut the door, privacy. Thirdly, he prayed. Principle of prayer. He prayed. That's a given. Our names of our children, names of the loved ones close to us should be on a list. I tell teachers, when you're teaching a 2nd grade class or a 4th grade or whatever, every name of that student should be on your daily prayer list, or at least on your weekly prayer list, that you can genuinely call by name their names in prayer before the throne of God. And so what he did, this was a natural outflow from the life of Elisha. He prayed. And what is prayer? Prayer is first adoration, then it is agreement, and then it is asking. That's the 3 aspects of prayer. You see that in the model prayer. in Matthew. Adoration for who God is, agreement about what I am, and then asking for what we need and what we want in these aspects of that. And so he gave himself to prayer. I don't need to park on that point except the fact we do need to pray.
Amen.
How much do we? Realize we have access to the throne, a personal invitation to access the throne of God with personal invitation in Hebrews. And we don't have to come with fear or apology. We can come with boldness to the throne, and we don't do it. I get convicted myself when I think the times when I should be such diligently in prayer. And yet, why don't I? Most Christians who want to grow in their life spend about 2 hours in prayer, but most of it is conversational praying. You're driving to an appointment, God, I need wisdom for this, and so on. And in 24 hours, you're probably in conversational prayer with God about 2 hours of those 24 hours. But what's missing and what's convicting to me is the crying out praying, the closet praying, that which is not just conversational while we're in the concourse of life, but that which is crying out for the desperate needs. And as Charlene and I now are going through another phase of life and entering another new normal, we're learning more and more again about the crying out praying, about the committed praying, not just the casual driving to the bank or driving to an appointment praying. And so he prayed. And then he went up and lay upon the child, put his mouth on his mouth, eyes on his eyes, hands on his hands, and stretched himself upon the child. Remember, they were God-given, empowered prophets. I don't recommend a teacher in high school and saying, well, this kid has a problem, I'm going to lay on him all afternoon. And tell the principal, he said, yeah, I know, I already got a call from their attorney on that. I know how you handle that counseling scenario. Remember, these were prophets of God, empowered prophets of God. And so, he literally gave himself to that child. The principle of price. Because how was he enabled to do that? Because he himself laid himself out. He burned everything that was his past. He burned every bridge behind him to follow the calling of God in his life. And when you see what Elisha did when the mantle was laid on him, he went home, burned up the yokes, sacrificed the oxen, turned his back forever on what had been his provision in his life, and turned his face to following God wholly and completely. And you see, he did almost twice as many miracles as Elijah did, empowered by God. But he gave himself literally to the child. And when we study, I would jot there in the column, Philippians chapter 2. Philippians chapter 2. There we see what Christ did for us. He went to the cross. He literally laid himself out that we might have life. Principle of price. And then the principle of perseverance. And I think we're getting just about out of time, aren't we? Principle of perseverance. He didn't give up. He returned and walked. Well, he stretched himself on the child, and the flesh of the child waxed warm. In other words, he didn't stop just because the child waxed warm. He returned and walked in the house to and fro, went up and stretched himself upon him, and the child sneezed 7 times and opened his eyes. he called Gehazi and said, call Shunammite. So he called her. When she was come in unto him, he said, take her up, take up thy son. Then she went in and fell at his feet, bowed herself to the ground, took up her son, and went out. Principle of perseverance. Never giving up. Now, question, why was Gehazi not usable? What was wrong with Gehazi? What do we know about Gehazi? You remember chapter 5 of 2 Kings? Naaman came for healing. This little slave girl was sweeping and cleaning up the house. She was a slave. And this big military leader, Naaman, comes in, and he's probably kicking furniture, and now I've got leprosy. And the little girl told Naaman's wife, there's a man back in my country who can heal your husband. Really? She said, this little girl who works for us said that she's somebody from where she's from. There's a guy there who can heal you. And Naaman packs up, gets a whole wagon load of gifts and treasures, and he's going to go for this healing. Come there, Elisha, commentators believe he was in his time of prayer, and he only sent word, go tell him to dip in Jordan 7 times. His flesh will be clean as a baby. Naaman got arrogant, and he said, I'm leaving. And then finally he listened to his servant and said, why don't you do what the man of God says? And so he does. On the 7th time he comes up, flesh clean as a baby, and he wants to give all of this load of gifts that he brought, the riches that he brought. And Gehazi, or Naaman, Elisha said, no. What did Gehazi do? He followed Naaman and said, my master basically changed his mind, and he would like some of that. And he said, have all of it. He said, no, just a few things. And if a person is in ministry for himself, he is not worth a plug nickel when it comes to touching and changing lives. So Gehazi was discovered. And I think that Shunammite questioned that there's something haywire about this person. Plastic becomes very evident. Well, I've got to stop. Father, may you touch us that we would indeed take lessons from this Old Testament thing for our learning.